Over the last 9 months, I have dedicated a quite vast portion of my life to making Young Justice videos. I remember distinctly growing up just how much I loved this show. I remember loving both seasons of the show. I remember Young Justice was one of the few shows that was in constant rotation for me during my childhood when we'd do these long car rides. And it's really telling that now as I go back and watch it, when I watched the first season, it was like experiencing a dish you had as a child, but it was just as great as you remember it being. Even when I took off the nostalgia goggles so I could talk about this show to all of you guys, it still felt like I was talking about something I truly loved. But as we moved on to the second season, and I've watched it over and over and over again as I do to make these videos, it's as though I just find more and more holes to poke into the second season. And once was something that didn't bother me a lot as a child in the time skip, and something that didn't really seem to bother me too much during my first few videos on this topic, as I've dug into some of these other characters, the time skip for me has looked progressively worse and worse upon each rewatch. And it's almost like having this memory of something you love so much being tainted and spoiled by what feels like poor decision making. And so today it's really time that we address the elephant in the room and talk about Young Justice's time skip and why I think it fundamentally fails while also being a good idea at the same time. But man, firstly though, I gotta do something about this chair. You see, I've had this chair since before Young Justice Season 3 even came out, but thank you to the sponsor of this video, Flexispot, for giving me the ability to finally move on from my old chair and upgrade to the Ergo X office chair. I spend the majority of my day, unfortunately, sitting down and working in front of my computer, so having a good chair is truly important, especially one that is not only easy to assemble, but comes with a whole host of features for your comfort specifically. Features like the 3D armrest, you can bring them up, down, shift the arm angle left and right, and shift it forward and backwards. Built-in and adjustable lumbar support, a working pneumonic system to send the chair up and down, and of course an adjustable headrest. It's perfect, it's modern, it's sleek, and it's just great for people from 5'1" to 6'2", which is just perfect for me. And of course it even has a recline feature with a fantastic footrest. With a durable and breathable mesh, this is truly an all-in-one office chair. The Ergo X checks all of the boxes for me. Flexispot, I firmly believe, is a truly quality company. The desk that you saw at the beginning of the video is actually their E5 standing desk. It was the first major upgrade I made personally with my own money for this channel, was to get a better desk. And I chose Flexispot because they make truly quality items. So I was honored that they wanted to reach out and work with me as a creator. So why don't you go ahead and go get your own Ergo X down in the description and enjoy having a truly great office chair. And without further ado, back to your regularly scheduled program. The largest criticism I seem to see levied at the time skip is the loss of character growth and what that growth means for the characters we pick up with after 5 years later. For example, one of the things that always bugged me the most about the time skip was Rocket. Raquel had joined the team literally right at the tail end, an episode before the finale. So she was brand new to the team, and they pretty much left her out to dry. They hinted at a relationship with Aqualad, and that's just that. They did absolutely nothing with her character throughout almost every single season of Young Justice. And this bothered me a lot because what was the point of introducing this brand new character and then doing nothing with said character? It's something that's bothered me since I was a child, but something I quickly overlooked because I was presented with a whole host of new characters in the second season, such as Blue Beetle, who I was already predisposed to liking from seeing him in Batman the Brave and the Bold. And that's not even mentioning Zatanna, who got far more screen time than Rocket, but also was kicked to the wayside well after season 1, and we didn't really get to see a lot more of Zatanna until the 4th season of this show, after a massive hiatus due to cancellation. And even then, I don't really love that arc particularly from the 4th season. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. When we met the team in that 1st season, it was all about a coming of age story, stepping outside of the shadows of their previous mentors and becoming heroes in their own right, and legacy heroes at that. Some of these people would have to pick up the capes and cowls of their former mentors at some point in their life, and this was their time to truly step out and step into their own, at least for a little bit. And when we were getting to the end of that 1st season, we started to see a team that were not only gelling way better than they did originally, but were also truly stepping into roles as heroes of their own. And then we just got nothing, because the show skips ahead 5 years. Instead of seeing how Robin, for example, went from never wanting to be like Batman to ultimately becoming closer to Batman than he ever would have wished and needing to step back from the team. We don't get to see what happened during those 5 years that pushed Nightwing into acting far more like Batman and far less like the kid who was afraid that he'd become that dark thing that goes bump in the night. He was afraid of becoming that, and yet he ultimately did. But we have no context as an audience to how he got there. We run into the exact same problem with Superboy as well. I clearly get how we got from this.
And that's supposed to make it right? You tricked us into thinking Twister was Red Tornado.
To this.
Look, enough with this Earthlings thing. I'm half Kryptonian, and Miss Martian is Martian.
You came here from Earth? Did you not?
Yeah, but we're not... Never mind.
But it feels extraordinarily cheap and like it's come on way too fast, because at the end of the 1st season, we just started to see Connor become okay with himself, become calmer, start to build a relationship with Superman, and then we got nothing, because when we do the time skip, his relationship with Superman is amazing, his relationship with the Kents is great, and Superboy himself is in a far more calm state. He crashes out way less, and he's chill. I never loved the idea of Superman being averse to Connor. I feel like Superman, as many people have said, would have looked at Connor and said, this is my cousin, or this is my brother, this is my son, whatever he chooses. He would have accepted Connor as he was. And if we're going to give Superman that wrinkle of not accepting Connor, if we're going to challenge him at a fundamental moral level to what Superman is and the character that Superman is, why don't we explore it? Why is it just treated as an afterthought and then brushed under the rug during the 5-year time skip? Again, this is another massive missed opportunity by the show. We also see this with McGann, a character that I loved so much in the 1st season, that I praised so heavily and saw so much of myself in, only to turn around and in the 2nd season feel almost like a completely different character. Like, do I understand McGann's motivations? Sure. But it would have been way better had we seen the development of those relationships, had we seen why she chose to use her powers in the way she does, why she felt it was most effective to do so by just turning villains catatonic, even the lowest common denominators of villains. And then we could really dig into the relationship breakdown between her and Connor, watching the fallout, and then watching where we are from season 2. All of that is completely missed, unfortunately, because we jumped ahead. Now, I've just spent like the last 9 minutes complaining about these time skip, but there are some aspects to it that I truly enjoyed. For instance, I actually felt like Wally and Artemis by extension and their relationship was handled very well through the time skip. And in my opinion, I can very easily see how Wally could have gone from seeing superheroism as fun, as enjoyable, as the family business, to wanting to be retired and to wanting to be done. I think the episode in which we see the Hall of Dead Heroes does a lot to add to the credence of why Wally doesn't want to be a hero anymore, and that's without even touching the materials in between the two seasons that are supposed to fill in the gaps. And that's actually where I want to bring in my next big problem with the time skip. All of the filler that's supposed to explain away, the entire time skip was really annoying. I have never been the biggest fan of tie-in comic books for these large-scale DC animated shows that are meant to fill in the gaps of time that we, the audience, missed. I've always preferred these to be as little tacked-on add-ons of exciting, sometimes canon, sometimes non-canon adventures that we can see these characters go on, just to have a little bit more of what we might consider our favorite characters. I have never liked them as filler substitutes to what could have been like possibly 3 to 4 seasons of a TV show. And then you add on to that one of the biggest character motivations for Calder specifically, and the reason he really made the turn to being evil, was the death of Tula. And we don't see that in the show at all. It's implied, it's talked about, but if you want to see the death of Tula, if you want to see Calder emotionally break down, if you want to see him go through the range of emotions that losing the love of his life for the second time is going to take him through, you have to go play one of the worst beat-em-up games I've ever played in my life, and that's Young Justice Legacy. This show had a tie-in video game that most people had no idea about. I had it as a kid. I remember loving it as a kid, but much like as I've gotten older and come back to watch some of these shows, God, that game sucks. I'm sorry, but it's bad. It's really bad. It is quite honestly the definition of cash grab tie-in, despite the fact that it holds such significance to the characters. For example, half of my Roy Harper video that I made for season 2, half of the section on the original clone of Roy Harper, that is all coming straight from that video game, because it provides us detailed journals of all the 5-year time skip for Roy. And those journals are fantastic reads. They're amazing reads. They helped me understand his character far more than I did when he was just in the TV show. The problem? They're locked as collectibles in a game that is bad. They are locked behind you, the consumer, buying another product and going out of your way to 100% that other product you bought that already isn't good. And look, I was a huge fan of comic books growing up. I understand what it is to have to buy a comic book line as a kid and then realize that you're gonna miss a crucial part of this line if you don't go out and buy the new Wonder Woman book, because part of your Batman story intersects with Wonder Woman and they chose to put it in her book. I get that, but it was annoying as a kid, it's annoying to me as an adult, and it's extra annoying when it's a TV show. And I know a lot of people who aren't going to go out of their way to do something like that, to gain the extra knowledge, which just leads to more frustration from the fan base. And that's something I can vehemently see throughout a majority of the comments on my videos when it comes to this second season. I mean, it's not like the second season of the show didn't have ideas that I absolutely loved. I loved the idea of putting a wrinkle into the relationship of Connor and McGann, going from the poster relationship to something that needs fixed. But I wasn't a fan of the execution. I was a huge fan of taking a character, throwing them undercover, and presenting them as truly being bad guys. And I think Calder was the perfect pick. He was a completely original character to the show and would be the most believable for going bad. That was a good idea with solid ideas around it, but the execution was once again a failure. When I look at Superboy's development, I love the idea of a character that starts off so angry, so one-dimensional, and grows into being far more than what he was originally purposed for. Think like an X-23 or a Wolverine. But ultimately, we don't get to see any of that development. I loved the idea of Robin not wanting to be Batman and accidentally becoming Batman because that's the reality of the job. Those are the tough situations of leadership, and he broke underneath that facet. A character that was always billed as being the leader, being made to be the leader, fails once again at being lead because maybe that really wasn't his position to take, and Calder has been shown to be a better leader the entire time. I absolutely love these ideas, but the execution wasn't there. And so this leads me to one simple question. Why does Young Justice have the time skip? Why did Greg Weisman choose to do this with the characters? And I have no actual idea. There's no way I'm big enough to actually get into contact with Greg Weisman, nor really anybody that worked on this show, and that's unfortunate. And so from this point forward, take everything I'm going to say with a massive grain of salt, because all I can do is speculate. Greg Weisman as a showrunner has been a large part of my childhood from the very beginning. He has written on a multitude of shows that I absolutely loved watching growing up. Things like Kim Possible. He was a writer on the movie Hercules, the Men in Black TV series. He was a supervising producer on Gargoyles, a show that I absolutely loved and hope to be able to talk about one day. He was a writer for The Batman 2004 to 2007, a writer on Ben 10, Legion of Superheroes, even if it was only for one episode. This man spent a large majority of my childhood making it special. And that's without even mentioning co-developing Spectacular Spider-Man. And this is where my thought process for why Young Justice did what it did comes in. You see, he was the co-developer, writer, and producer of notably two shows before this one, Max Steel in 2000 and 2008 to 9's Spectacular Spider-Man. And he, unfortunately, never got to fulfill his vision of a true Spider-Man show. And again, I'm just spitballing here, but my biggest guess would be that Greg Weisman himself wanted to make a show that was larger than the few characters that we had, that really encompassed the entirety of a DC universe in one show. And knowing Warner Brothers specifically and their track record for how long they would actually give shows to be on the air and develop, especially shows that weren't selling a fuck ton of toys, Greg himself had to figure out how he could show off a universe like this while still doing it in maybe 1 to 3 seasons, depending on how much WB would give him. And so I think that's where the concept of the time skip really comes in. We know from his own talking points on Twitter and things like that, that this was always the plan. The plan was for Young Justice to always have this time skip. But I don't know if the entire execution of it was really left up to his hands. And I kind of hope it wasn't, because the execution wasn't great. I can understand why he would want to do this, especially because the idea that the show would get cut off soon was true. They were only given 2 seasons to make this show, and the production of the first season was already kind of all over the place. It started airing in 2010. I don't believe it stopped airing until like 2012 almost. So it's not really a surprise that the show was going to go in this direction and was going to be canceled. He'd already dealt with it on Spectacular Spider-Man, so I can kind of understand why he wanted to do this time skip, why he would want to showcase a larger DC universe, because especially in seasons 3 and 4, as the scope broadens even more, I think his work as a world builder, a universe builder, and as somebody who can create what feels like a functioning and lived in DC universe is phenomenal. But what we lost in exchange for that was a real focus and core analysis on the characters that we, the audience, came to love so much. I think, had they fully committed to the new trio that they introduced in that first episode of Young Justice, Blue Beetle, Lagoon Boy, and of course, Tim Drake's Robin, we could have had a show that follows a new core group of superheroes every single season. Is that what everyone would have wanted? Probably not, but it would have been something new. But trying to split time between our old core of characters and a brand new core with a heavy emphasis on Blue Beetle to the point that some episodes just felt like a Blue Beetle show, I feel that in trying to do so much, we ultimately did nothing at all, especially for our core cast of characters we the audience came to love so much. There are so many empty plot threads between Connor and McGann, between Nightwing and Roy, and all of these characters that I feel like should have had more attention and more love put onto them. Artemis especially, one of my absolute favorite standout characters from the first season, can sometimes feel like an afterthought in the second season. Even relative to Wally, who straight up retires and is only in like 7 episodes. So with all of that being said, this is just a really long way for me to say yes. The time skip was a failure. Not a failure of idea, but a failure in execution. And unfortunately, that led us to getting a product that could have been so much more. It leaves me wondering a lot of the times what the show could have been had it been given like 5 or 6 seasons, and had it taken like 2 or 3 seasons more to get to the point where we were in the second season of Young Justice. I don't say all of this because I hate Young Justice's second season. I still stand by what I said in the idea that it's my favorite season, and that I love it to death. But it's not as good as the first. It's still my favorite, but nothing tops the first season in quality from a character dynamic perspective, and how they get along, how they treat each other, and how each character grew through each season, if that makes sense. So taking off the nostalgia glasses, taking off the veneer of watching this show for over a decade, the time skip sucks, and there's no real getting around that. It's bad. And as much as I've tried to ignore it, as much as I've tried to write my way out of it, it's bad. This video was actually going to be a in defense of video. I was going to be in defense of the time skip, but the more that I thought about it from a perspective of somebody who does not do this for a living, somebody that just watches these shows for enjoyment and to have fun, and somebody who doesn't have an infinite amount of time to absorb themselves in ideas and thoughts of Young Justice, I have really come to realize it's just poor writing, unfortunately. And we speed run through a lot of great moments. As much as I like looking at slices of these characters' lives, and as much as I know the show already jumps around in time a lot, with sometimes missions being months apart from each other, it could have been handled way better. We could have had 6 months. We could have had a year. Something shorter. Maybe introduce 1 or 2 new characters instead of trying to introduce 10 to 12 and biting off more than you could chew. But at the end of the day, I don't write these stories. I'm just a 19-year-old that sits and talks about them in his basement, okay? I'm not being paid the big bucks to make these decisions, and I would never come at someone like Greg Weisman, for example, for making these decisions in like a super negative light, because ultimately, I'm discussing this second season like it's bad, when in reality, it's like going from a 9 out of 10 to an 8 out of 10. Sure, is it a step down in quality? Yeah, but it's still great. And Greg has provided a lot of genuinely wonderful projects for me throughout my life, all the way up until today. So it would be extremely disingenuous of me to just say he's bad at his job. Ultimately, I'm not a fan of the time skip as I once was as a kid. And it's really hard to admit that something you loved so much as a kid doesn't hold up as well as you remember it holding up. I hadn't seen the second season of Young Justice since middle school, when I was rewatching it to get ready to see the third season. So it had been a very, very long time. And I had just remembered it in a really different light, and I remembered it being so much better than it was. It doesn't take away what this show means to me and what the second season meant to me, especially going through a tumultuous point in my life. But when I take off those rose-tinted glasses, it could have been done so much better. But at the end of the day, I still love this show. So thank you all for watching, and thank you to the sponsor of this video, Flexispot, for providing me with a good chair because my old one really needed to go. Use the link in the description to get your own.